Mr. President.
Majority Whip.
Mr. President, today we take a moment to remember the anniversary of September 11th, 2001. Many people recall vividly that day where they were. I was in this building, outside that door and a few steps down the hallway. I can recall seeing on a small television set the planes striking the towers in New York. At first we were confused. What is going on here? That a plane would strike a building. But when the second one took place, it started to dawn on us this was no longer an accident. It was by design. And I can recall looking down the mall toward the Washington Monument and seeing black smoke billowing across the mall. It took a few minutes to establish what had happened. A plane had crashed into the Pentagon at our Department of Defense, killing the innocent people on the plane and in that building. And what we were seeing was the smoke from the fire of that crash. It wasn't a few moments afterwards that someone came to the door and said, "Evacuate, leave the building." Now, I've been around Capitol Hill for a number of years. I'd never heard that before. But we all took it seriously and we piled out onto what was a lawn between here and the Supreme Court building. And people gathered. Tourists came up to me and said, "Do you work here?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Where are we supposed to go?" A very fundamental question, because at that point we heard sonic booms from the jets that were being scrambled to protect this building. We assumed it would be the next target. And it might have been, were it not for the courage of the passengers and crew on that United Airlines flight that was brought down in Pennsylvania before it could reach Washington, D.C. Memories we all have and will carry for a lifetime of what happened 22 years ago. Now, 22 years later, we are connected by sadness as we reflect on 2,977 lives lost at the World Trade Center in New York, the Pentagon in Washington, and that field in Pennsylvania. But we also remember the care for our communities and common purpose we found after that tragedy, after the attacks, as our nation sought to find light amidst the darkness. In our most divided moments, we should look to that as a reminder that America as a nation is at its best when we seek unity and humanity over separation and hate. Mr. President, I listened carefully to the statements made by my colleague from Kentucky, the Republican leader, Senator McConnell. I want to join in and make it clear I agree with virtually every word he spoke concerning our relationship with Ukraine. I do want to add a footnote, which he may not have added, and I want to give credit to this president, currently serving, Joe Biden, who led the United States' return to NATO after the previous president's administration. There have been serious questions as to whether NATO as an alliance would even survive under the previous president. And President Biden has told members of the Senate and others that the first meeting of NATO after he was elected, our allies basically sat down and said, "President Biden, is America in for the long haul when it comes to NATO?" And even before the Ukraine challenge, he said yes. What happened after Vladimir Putin, the war criminal, invaded Ukraine was that the members of the NATO alliance had to answer a basic question: would we respond to the challenge? I think the record is clear. NATO as an alliance has never, ever been stronger than it is today. The countries that are part of it have made a commitment not only to their common defense, but also to help Ukraine in any way possible put an end to this invasion. In fact, if you reflect on what has happened to Vladimir Putin since he invaded Ukraine a little over a year and a half ago, you realize that the world is a lot worse for him. The NATO alliance is not only strong, it's larger than ever. The accession of Finland and Sweden to join the NATO alliance was a bold, strong move that really gives notice to Vladimir Putin that his future is even more in doubt when it comes to his reliance and his relationship with the West. To think now that Finland and Sweden are part of NATO and to take a look at a map of Europe is to realize that the Baltic Sea is now a NATO sea with only 2 minor exceptions. And it means that we're stronger than ever. And I agree with Senator McConnell, we need to stand behind Ukraine and the NATO alliance now more than ever, as people are making sacrifices and giving their lives for the cause of freedom and sovereignty. So, Mr. President, I couldn't agree more with his statements. I do question when he talks about violence in the streets of Chicago as to why he never refers to cities in red states that are witnessing the same phenomena going on today. In fact, even worse than in my city of Chicago that I represent. We have a crime problem in this country and we have to deal with it. It's made more difficult and challenging because of the proliferation of guns in America. We're a nation of 320 million people, perhaps, with 400 million guns. And they are moving across state borders with abandon into the hands of people who have no business owning a gun. We could do a lot more about that right here in the Senate. I still remember that it was a little over a year ago in Highland Park, Illinois, when a deranged individual went on the roof of a local business, pulled out his weapon, and fired 83 rounds in 60 seconds into a crowd, killing 7 innocent people, injuring dozens of others. Why in the world he should ever have had a military assault weapon is beyond me. And it's way beyond anything the Founding Fathers envisioned when they wrote the Second Amendment. We can do more and should do more to make the streets safer across America. And I would agree with that part of Senator McConnell's speech. But I wish he would have given us a more complete presentation of the challenge we face. Now, Mr. President, on another subject. This weekend marked 2 years, the second anniversary, since the Food and Drug Administration missed a federal court-ordered date to finish its review of vaping applications, e-cigarette applications, that have illegally flooded the market in the United States. We estimate that during that 2-year period of time when the FDA refused to respond to the federal court order, approximately 2 million American children may have started vaping. And despite missing this deadline by 2 years, the Food and Drug Administration remains nowhere close to meeting the legal mandate to regulate these addictive e-cigarettes. You see, under the law, a vaping product is required to apply first to the FDA before entering the market and prove to the Food and Drug Administration that the e-cigarette is, quote, in the law, this is from the law, appropriate for the protection of public health. They can't prove that. This has not happened. Instead, tens of thousands of dangerous, highly addictive e-cigarettes have legally shown up on store shelves without FDA review or approval, and they've hooked a generation of kids. In fact, studies have shown that there are more vaping devices on the market today than 2 years ago, when the FDA was ordered by a federal court to do something. That's unacceptable. My office recently investigated the FDA's effectiveness in following through, even after it issues a denial for a vaping application. So a company comes to the FDA, submits their product, is supposed to show how it's consistent with public health, fails to do so, they're told not to sell the product in America, and what do? We found that many FDA-denied e-cigarettes, which subsequently received warning letters for continuing to sell in violation of the law, still remain available. I just don't understand it. The Food and Drug Administration is cowardly, refusing to use its full arsenal of enforcement tools, fines, injunctions, for even the most flagrant cases. We also found the FDA has only issued closeout letters to 10% of the tobacco products that it had warned were violating the law. The administration, through the Food and Drug Administration, has the authority to decide whether a vaping device or cigarette can be sold. They decide it cannot be. They tell them, you've got to stop at this point. How many actually followed the warning and refused to violate the law? 1 out of 10, meaning the agency has one of the worst records in history of following through and ensuring compliance with enforcement. I've referred all this information to the Department of Justice. Maybe they'll take action. Let me be clear, none of the most popular e-cigarettes used by kids have been granted the authority to be sold in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration. Yet they remain on the market in violation of the law, putting our children and teenagers in harm's way. This isn't the only instance where FDA's delays are dangerous. Last month, the FDA blew through a deadline to finalize rules to prohibit menthol-flavored cigarettes and flavored cigars. This regulation is also long overdue and has the potential to save thousands of lives. The FDA must end its delays. This week, we're going to embark on a task that is really rare. The full United States Senate this week is going to consider 3 government spending bills. You say to yourself, well, I'm sure that's happened before. Yes, about 5 years ago. And since then, what we've done is wait until the very last minute when all hell's about to break loose and create omnibus spending bills. But this year, we are actually going to bring an appropriation bill to the floor of the Senate. It's a cause of celebration. This package includes appropriation bills for agriculture, which funds the Food and Drug Administration. In light of the FDA's embarrassing delay in reviewing these products and keeping them away from kids, I am preparing amendments to the bill to improve regulatory and enforcement efforts. I hope my colleagues will join me in this effort to protect children from big tobacco. It cannot be business as usual for the Food and Drug Administration and its commissioner. We have to do something. I'm glad to say the bills we're considering this week include bills that have had strong, overwhelming bipartisan support. In addition to agriculture, it will be the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Bill and the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Spending Bill. Each bill makes significant investments in America. These bills would provide veterans with mental health services they deserve, strengthen and improve our nation's infrastructure, and ensure women, infants, and children can get the nutrition that they need. My colleagues on the Senate Appropriations Committee, led by Chair Patty Murray, my fellow senator from the state of Washington, and Ranking Member Susan Collins, my friend and member senator from Maine, worked across the aisle to pass all 12 bills out of committee. Mr. President, I know that you're new to the Senate, but I want to tell you, this is also new to the Senate. It's been so seldom that we've ever had 2 working together so well on a bipartisan basis, and I commend them both. The leaders of each subcommittee drafted bills to the levels agreed upon in the debt ceiling deal made between the Republican-controlled House of Representatives and President Biden. Remember when we were facing that debt ceiling debate and afraid that our government, maybe our economy, would shut down? And Joe Biden stepped in and negotiated with Speaker of the House, Republican Kevin McCarthy, and they came up with a spending plan on a bipartisan basis so that they could pass the bill for the debt ceiling. That was just a few months ago. Now a handful of Republicans in the House say, throw out the deal. Let's start all over, with the risk of shutting down the government as a very real possibility for them. It would be the height of irresponsibility and a painful decision that would hurt veterans, people receiving Social Security, innocent people across America. I hope that Kevin McCarthy will stick by his agreement with President Biden, and I hope that he'll tell the extremists in his caucus this is no way to run a government. The Senate is making good on its promise on this side of the rotunda to the American people by working to fund the government through regular order on appropriation bills. I wish our Republicans in the House could say the same. They've drafted bills to levels wildly less than those were agreed on. Here's where they think we should make cuts: education, medical research, public safety, public health programs, and more. And so far, they've been unable to pass all of these partisan drafts out of committee. Here in the Senate, we're following regular order and working to avoid a shutdown and fund the government without interruption, because we've seen the ramifications of putting politics above our duty to the American people. Shutdowns severely reduce our gross domestic product, forced families to go without paychecks, and signaled to our adversaries that we hesitate to make the critical investments necessary to remain competitive and keep our country secure. Last week, I was pleased to hear Senate Minority Leader McConnell, who just left the floor, say we, quote, need to keep the lights on, close quote, by funding the government through regular order. I couldn't agree with him more. I hope our House Republican colleagues will heed this message and meet with us to meet the moment in this history. Today is a day of history. Let's make our own in the future in a much more positive way, and I'm confident that we can. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.